Okay, let's start. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the talk. I hope the sound is good. If not, do something. So I'm Simon Ray. I'll be presenting this talk about the Buurtbudget. So I'll get into all the details of that very soon. I work at the UvA. I work on the other side of the street at the Institute for Logic, Language and Computation. And that has nothing to do with logic or language, but has to do with computation. So we still do fit in there. And I'll broadly introduce you the kind of research we do there, and more specifically using the Buurtbudget as an example. Okay? All right, let's get started. So throughout this talk, I want you to think of yourself as one of those persons on this photo here. So you are all elected at the gemeenteraad, and you're having one of this municipality meeting, and you have to make some kind of decision. So you're one of the members of the gemeente, I guess. So if my Dutch is not correct, but yeah. And as one of the members of this meeting, you have to decide on how to allocate a budget to some potential projects. So the idea here is that you've got different, so you're living in this little nice town here, and you've got different projects for the town. So maybe we can have a little party here, maybe we can build a fountain in here, maybe we can put some plants on top of that. All of those are different projects that you can implement to enhance the standard quality of the town. And all these projects, they have a certain cost that is described down there, and you've got a limited budget. And because you've got a limited budget, you have to have a way to decide on which of these projects you want to fund in the end. Okay? How would you do that? I need at least one answer before I move to the next slide. How would you do that? So you're like at the gemeenteraad, someone came on the stage, presented these 5 projects, and you're like, okay, what kind of process can you use to choose which of the project to fund? Any idea? Yes?
You can ask the neighborhood residents what they would like.
Yes, you can ask the neighborhood residents what they would like, indeed. That's a very good idea, because that was in the title of the talk. So that's indeed exactly what I want to talk about. Sorry? About the Buurtbudget.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but indeed, that's a very good idea. Any other ideas? What can we do?
Allocate it yourself.
Yeah, indeed, right? And that's what happens most of the time. Whatever person is in charge of that will make the decision. We don't really know on what basis, but somehow a decision will be made, and that's usually what happens. Okay, but what I want to have a look at today is what you propose. Sorry, I don't have the names. And it's actually to ask the people living in the neighborhood, you can see they've showed up on the picture, what they think about this project, and use that additional information to make your decision on which of the project to fund. And that's what is called the Buurtbudget, or participatory budgeting in English. And it's the idea of allowing the citizen to express their opinion on a project when it comes to public funding, public money spending decisions. Yeah, and that's all this entire talk will be about that, and how we can use mathematics and computer science to hopefully come up with better ways of developing this idea. Okay. So the way we'll be organized is usually as follows. There's some way of, like you would think of the process of the way you want to ask the people how the people will give their opinion, the way you want to count the votes, all these things. Then comes the actual vote, and then you decide on the set of projects that will be funded in the end. And that's something that has become huge in recent years. So it started some 30 years ago in Brazil, in order to improve the democratic process. So it was really meant for having like additional representation for the citizen in the whole democratic process. And it now has spread all around the world. And I don't know if the numbers can be read from your side, but basically it's like in many different countries you will find such example of participatory budgeting and all of these things. And also in Europe, you can see that on this map the Netherlands is still white because they just did not have the data, but it also is happening in the Netherlands and more specifically in Amsterdam. So that really is the whole participatory budgeting idea. Yeah, okay. So you are the gemeenteraad and you have decided to run a participatory budgeting process. So you've decided that you want to ask the citizen what they think about the project. The next obvious question is how do you do that, right? So you've got a budget, you've got a set of projects, and you need, and then what somehow? Like what is it that you will ask the citizens? Any ideas on that? Any feeling about what we can do or?
Yeah, I guess somehow make them prioritize.
So like, this is my first project, this is my second. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Other ideas? No?
Let them choose like 3 or something.
Okay, so yeah, you select 3 that are your best. You don't have any order, but those are your 3 most, yeah?
Ask them to do the criteria for selection, so whether it's more expensive or cheaper, or whether it's something that's more necessary or not, or it's a function or not.
So you kind of order them and you have an objective way of ordering them. Like as a voter, I prefer this one I find to be the most useful, this one I find to be, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I like that. Yes?
I guess quite often you just ask for the most favorite.
Yeah? Okay, so that kind of goes back to the 3 best thing. Yes, okay. So what I'll be doing and what is done, I think, in most of the places is actually not ranking, because we tend to think that it's hard for people to come up with rankings and it's a bit too heavy for them to vote on that. So what we do is usually we just ask them, for each project, do you like it, yes or no? Or saying it differently, please give me all the projects you like. And sometimes we put a bound, like sometimes you cannot approve more than 3, whatever. But yeah, that's, if you look at what's happening in real life, that's most of the time the kind of data you get. Okay, so we've got the budget limit, we've got all the available projects, and we've got the approval, so what we call approval ballots. So each voter is telling us what they approve or not. So let's, for instance, consider this example here. The next question is, what do we do with that? Right? So we have, you're still at the gemeenteraad, you run your process, you received all the ballots. All you've received looks like this. So like you have 3 voters who said, I like the bench, don't like the sports stuff, the party stuff not, I like the fountain. All of this, okay? What should be selected? What do we do from here? Yes?
You could look at the ones that have the most votes and then create a few package deals and let them vote on that. Because you can't combine the fountain with the garden.
Yes.
You make possibilities within your budget.
Okay. So I think I've drawn all the sensible possibilities down there. But so which one would be the winner? Because you would ask them to vote again. So like first you vote, and then you you somehow use this vote to make groups, and then you vote again for selecting the final group.
Then the fountain and the bench would win.
So it depends on the way you count the votes.
Yeah.
But okay, I'll get back to that. Yes.
See which of the groups matches best the objective of the gemeente. Because now the objectives are just to make the people happy and spend the money.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yes. Different. The cheapest, but then you don't select anything. That's the cheapest, right? Yeah, I mean, so what you say was correct. There's a way of saying somehow the fountain here has 4 votes and the bench here has 4 votes. And actually, so maybe this bench and fountain should be the selected projects, right? Because they both are supported by the largest number of voters.
I feel like it's a trick question.
Sorry?
I feel like you're...
Oh yeah, of course it's a trick question, right? I do have some slides to go through, so that's definitely not the end of the question. Okay, would anyone has selected a different subset of project than the bench and the fountain? Yes, Dean.
Maybe the €2,000 one and the fountain.
So like the sports stuff and the fountain?
Yeah, because the 3 people at the top, they would get the bench and the fountain, that's a lot for them. But the 2 blue ones, they didn't get anything. So maybe they should get the €2,000 one.
Yeah, okay. We'll get back to that in 5 or 6 slides, I guess. So it's a good idea. Okay, let's stop thinking about that for the moment and see what we can do. So you're still at the gemeenteraad. You are facing this very difficult task of choosing what you'll be winning, and you're a bit lost. And because you're lost, you seek for help. And you're very lucky because I'm available, and I can come here and I can advise you on what is it that actually you could do. And why am I any good at advising you? It's because I study social choice. And so here comes the research part. Social choice is a field that is at the intersection between computer science and economics, roughly. And we study procedures, so like mathematical functions, which tells us, given an election, what should the outcome be. So we study what we call voting rules, which takes an instance of an election. So like here, we've got the project, the budget, what the votes are, and it's a function that takes all of that, and that tells me then the winner should be this. Okay, so that's the kind of mathematical objects we study. And so we study them in any kind of formal way, and we want to look at what kind of properties they have, and in the hope to come up with the best one. And in a hope for me to be able to tell you, well, you want to run a participatory budgeting process, use that way of counting the votes. So that's roughly the idea. And so participatory budgeting has been done in like real life way before social choice scientists looked at it. And what it means is that there's many ways of doing participatory budgeting out there that are not so great, and we know it as social choice scientists, but we only came afterwards, so we still have to kind of try to correct them. And one of the most widely used voting rule that is used for participatory budgeting works as follows. So we've got, is this done? Oh, well, okay. Anyways, doesn't matter. So we've got the election here. So all I've been describing. And what it does is that it first counts how many times each project has been approved of. Okay? And then you order the project from the most approved to the least approved. And you select them by going through that list from top to bottom. So you look at the first project, you're like, hey, can I take this project without violating the budget constraint? Yes, so I select the bench. Then you look at the fountain. Can I take the fountain without violating the budget constraints? Yes, because bench plus fountains is €6,000, I have €7,000, I'm fine. And then, of course, you go for the sport equipment, and that you can't afford. Neither can you afford the next one nor the plants. And so that's your outcome. Okay? Well, I mean, it's very natural. It's fair. That follows the idea you had on like 2 slides before. So why not? But there's a problem with that rule that has to do with what we call representation. And you can think of it as follows. We've got 7 voters here, and we've got a budget of 7,000 euros. Sorry. So what does it mean? It means that if you look at the proportion of the budget that each voter is entitled to, that proportion is 1/7. So each voter has control over 1,000 euro of the budget, right? Like if we were to split the budget equally among all the voters, they will all get a share of 1,000. And so like these 3 voters will get 3,000, 2,000, 1,000, 1,000. And then the question is, can they buy something with it? Like, is it possible that with your fraction of budget that you are entitled to, you can buy some of the projects you approved of? If so, I would argue that it makes sense that this project should be selected. And that's what Dean was referring to on the previous slide. Like, for instance, these 3 voters here, they all together control 3,000 of the budget, and they have a project which costs, they all approve of it, and it costs only 1,000. So this project, they deserve to have it. It does not cost more than the money the budget they deserve to have. More importantly, these 2 also deserve the sport equipment, because together they control 2,000 euros, and they actually have a project which costs 2,000 euros. The last voters also deserve the bench. And that's all we can say about representation, but maybe a rule that is representative in this sense should always select at least the bench and the sport equipment. Do we agree on that? Do you think it's natural to have such a view? Do you think it's that every rule should actually do that? Is it reasonable?
Well, I think the only problem, or one of the problems, is when you split it up this way, you'll never get to the fountain because there's not.
Indeed. So you will never get to the fountain because the fountain is super expensive, and it's very hard to have enough support for the fountain to actually have enough money to buy the fountain.
But if there's not enough support in that way, you could say that, okay, maybe it's not worth it.
Then so this approach would then say that the fountain is actually too expensive for what it brings to the community.
Even if you add like both groups that go for the fountain together, then you still only have 4,000.
If you have both groups,
Yeah, like
yes.
yeah.
Like if you have these 3 here and this yellow, if they make a coalition, altogether they can only have 4,000 euros, while the fountain is too expensive. So maybe it's actually just too bad for the fountain, but not enough people want it. I mean, I'm not claiming this is obviously the right way to go, but that's one way we like to think is nice, and so we're trying to develop voting rules that will satisfy this property. Do you have other opinions on that? Or should I move forward? No? Okay. Okay, well, as I was just saying, we want to develop voting rules. Okay. We want to develop voting rules that have this property. And of course, the rules I presented to you before does not satisfy this. Because if you remember, the rule before was selecting the fountain and the bench. And so the group of 2 who liked the sport equipment, they were not represented in the outcome. Can we do better? Do we know a way to do things better? Yes, we do. And I'll present you another voting rule that has been developed in the literature, much more fancy, but that satisfies this kind of representation. And the way it works is that we give each voter their share of the budget, So here I'm cheating a bit. So for the pink one, the one at the top, they all have the number that is written. So like actually we have 3 times 1,000 and then 2 times 1,000. So like the value shows the money that is available for one specific voter in this group. Okay, so we split the budget as I was telling you, and then we kind of run a race. How does it work? We say, if every voter were to give 10 euros, 50 euros, sorry, can they buy something? And the answer is no, for now. Like if they were all giving 50 euros, then for the benches we would have collected 200 euros, like 3 times 50 from there, because if you remember they liked the bench, and 150 from the yellow that was liking the bench as well. At the fountain we would have the same, but the fountain is much more expensive, so it covers a smaller proportion, then the other goes that way. You understand what I mean by these drawings? Okay, now if they were all paying 150 euros, then the figures would go that way. And so we increase this value, so like first 50, then 150, then we end up arriving at 250. And at 250, there's a group of voters who can buy something. Like the bench can be bought by the 4 voters who like it. So they buy it. They buy it. They all lose 250 euros because they use that money. And we start again. The bench has been bought. They have less money, and we do the same race. We look at what if they all pay 100 euros. And of course, you can see that on the second time we would rush to 1,000. And if they all pay 1,000, there's a group who can afford something. And this group are these 2 blue voters here, who together, using all their money, they can buy the sport equipment. So the sport equipment is bought, and that's selected. Then you run the race again. And we already know that nothing else can be bought. But you can play around if you want to. So this voting rule, what it does is that it selects this bench and the sport equipment as an outcome. And it's of course representative in the sense that I was telling you about before, because each voter is actually given that money, and if they can buy something, it means that they have enough money to buy it. Okay? Yes?
Now we have 4,000 euros left over.
Indeed. Now we have 4,000 euros left over, which is it's a bit weird somehow, right? Because we could have bought something with that. So we end up having money left that could have been used for some projects, because the party and the plants both cost less than 4,000, but still the rule does not want to select any of those because they just don't have enough support. That's a limitation of this rule. Oops. Yeah. That's a limitation of this rule. You can always do some trick where you'll say, well, then I run another kind of rule for the leftover money to kind of fill up the budget. Or then maybe in your specific case, the money is just not wasted and you can reuse it for next year or something like that. But indeed, yeah.
What is the name of this process? Does it have a name?
The rule itself, it's called Rule X. I did not come up with the rule, so I'm not responsible for the name of it. So okay, in general, the type of rule is what we would call Fragment's rule. So Fragment is a Swedish mathematician who came up with like similar ideas 200 years ago, like in the late 19th century. No? 80 something? Well, some time ago, and I'm checking with the people who know them. But yeah, no. So yeah, fragmin could be a better pointer than role X. Okay. Yay. We've actually been able to find a rule that satisfies this kind of representation. So you, as the mentored people, elected, whatever, you listened to this computational social choice expert and you decided to run the PB process. You used whichever of the rule that I came up with, and you decided which one sounds better for you, sounds best for you, and you used it. And then you run the whole process, you run the whole Buurtbudget process. You find it very nice, and I agree with you, it's a very nice idea. And so you're 1 year later and you want to rerun the process. And the thing is that I was a bit lying to you in the way I presented the participatory budgeting process before. And why is that? It's because usually the full process goes that way. And if you notice, there are several additional steps here. And these steps, what they mean, where they come from, is the idea that for this participatory budgeting process, not only the citizens vote for the project, but they also propose them. Okay? So if you look at like standard participatory budgeting processes, it would go as is written on this slide. So like you would have the citizen that will like think of some proposals, they will develop together with the municipality an actual project, and then they will vote for which of these projects that have to be selected. Okay? What does it mean for us, and for me more specifically, is that you can think of the process as a two-stage thing where there's kind of a voting happening in both of these stages. Why is so? So the idea that I was telling you about is that the agent will think about their proposal, then their proposal will be submitted, and the municipality will somehow select only a few of them. The municipality will shortlist some of the proposal that will only then, in a second stage, be brought to the vote to the citizens. And because I do social choice and because I like it, I actually, like if you tell me that, one idea is there a way to study the interaction between these two things? Because whatever you do in the first stage, when you propose the project, can actually have an impact on what will happen in the second stage when the people vote. And so maybe there's a way to come up with nice study of the integrated process and not just of the second stage, as I was telling you about before. What kind of interaction can we imagine between these two stages? Well, okay, if you look at, right, okay, let's go back to a municipality who has not had the chance of having any social choice expert in their neighborhood. And so they use the rule that I described first. Like you order them, you select the most preferred, then the second one, and so on. It's not a good rule, we know it, but it's out there. What could have happened? Say you were one of the blue voters. So you were sorry, what is that one say? Yeah. You were liking the sport equipment, but somehow it didn't work because the people like the benches a lot and the fountain. And so it has, like the bench and the fountain has been selected before your turn came up with this sport equipment. So you imagine you somehow know that it will happen because you've talked in the neighborhood, you know how the people will vote. But what you can do maybe is introduce a new project. Because during the first stage, you are the one who comes up with ideas. So you are the one proposing what we'll be voting on the second stage. And so maybe what you actually do is you introduce a new bench project, which is not exactly the same as the previous one. Right? The previous one was saying you put a bench in Beatrix Park. And now you're like, well, I would also want benches in Oyster Park. So I will also propose this project. And maybe the people who like benches, actually some of them will live in Oost, some of them will live in Zuid. And the one living in Oost, they would want the benches next to their place. And the one living in Zuid, they would want the benches in Beatrix Park. So their vote will somehow split up. And because of this split up, depending on how ties are broken and whatever, I chose it so that it works well for my example, but you see the idea. Maybe the former bench project actually does not get as much vote as it used to. And so if you still use this rule that I was mentioning before, the fountain will be selected because it now has the highest support. And then you are all tied up, and maybe the rule says you select the most expensive instead if there's a tie. And now your sport equipment comes in. So there is a way for you to lie in the first stage, in a sense of introducing projects that you don't like, just so that some projects you really like actually get in. And that's bad. I think we all agree on that, right? So another aspect of the research I'm doing is looking at this integrated process and see if we could find a way to prevent this from happening, either by defining how the shortlisting should be done. Maybe we can say there's no point having 2 bench projects, right? We just make one, and that's benches. It costs 2,000 euros, and we put benches all around the city. Right? Maybe it makes no sense to just have these 2 weird things. And in that way, you would prevent this kind of strategic interaction. Maybe there's other ways, but that's another topic that we'll look at with regard to this Buurtbudget thing. I still have 15 minutes, right? Yes, great. Okay, back at the gemeenteraad. That's the running thing, right? So you're back at the gemeenteraad. The year before you were running your new thing. So you've already run 2 PB processes. You're about to run your 3rd one. And at some point, some of you come up with the question, but are they really independent? Is it really fair to study each of these participatory budgeting processes as a one-shot election, even though we know, because we voted for it, that the PB process, the participatory budgeting process, will happen several times in the next 10 years? Does that make sense? Well, maybe not. Why do I have this here? And, okay, another example. Doesn't matter much. You've got 3 years, right? The first year you had something, I'm sorry, the numbers don't match, but the second year you had another election for PB, for participatory budgeting. The third year you had another election, for participatory budgeting. But, so we've got this whole process that is happening several times. We are always interested in having an outcome that represents the people, that represents the citizen, so that everyone is happy in the end. So I think something that makes sense is to consider this election as a full process, so that you can kind of take into account what happened in the previous years to actually make your decision for the current year. So what would be an example of that? Say last year you did not have enough budget to represent the people who lived in Oost. That happens, right? Like, it's too bad for them, I'm sorry, we just don't have enough money for you. But then maybe next year, the voters who come from this district, they actually can have a higher weight in the way you count the votes, to kind of compensate for the unfairness of the year before. It's like saying, I'm sorry guys, but next year we'll do something for you. And still, in my way of trying to define voting rules, I can try to come up with voting rules that actually take this information into account and use that to make my decision for the current year. Okay? That's another idea of what you could be looking at. That's another thing that we do look at in our own research. All right. Let's forget about the gemeenteraad for a bit. Let's say now tackles different issues. And let's talk about the field more in a more general way. So what I've presented you is what we call computational social choice. So that's what I mentioned before. And it's the study of finding suitable rules for collective decision problems. So whenever you have some decisions to make where a set of agents, a set of voters, a set of citizens is asked to give their opinion, that's basically the kind of problems we will be looking at. There are many different scenarios we look at. The kind of scenarios I've mentioned to you here with this participatory budgeting is this voting stuff. So many different things I'll be looking at, like single voters, like presidential elections, as we do have in France, or this parliament election as you have in the Netherlands, or this participatory budgeting is a different kind of things. All these different type of scenarios for voting. That's one thing we look at. We also look at what we call fair division, where you've got a set of items and a set of agents. They have preferences over the items, and you want to decide who gets what. So it could be, for instance, time slots for a course, right? Like all the teachers have an opinion on which time slots they would want. You can't give a time slot to two different persons at the same time, and you kind of take into account all these preferences to make your decision in the end. That's another example of what we're looking at. We also look at very different topics, ranging from matching, so like typically matching students to universities. Like the students have preferences on which university they want to go to, the university has preferences on which students they want to select, see what we can do here. Opinion diffusion is also something we look at, like many agents, Facebook, social networks, for instance. They have an opinion. They kind of try to discuss with their neighbor on the opinion to convince them that their opinion is good, see what's going on there. Liquid democracy, going back to this voting settings, where you can allow someone to vote for you. What does that change? Is it nice? Is it not? These kind of questions. Those are like general topic of the field. More specifically at the UvA, we've got this nice little group here. So we are 8 plus me 9, looking at very different questions. So we've got Arthur Boaxel, who works together with Oliviero on trying to find justification for the outcome. Like I presented you this representation property. Can we always find such a property to explain why such an outcome has been selected? That's roughly the idea. Shirin, who's understanding on who's studying when voters have an incentive to behave untruthfully, like exactly as this proposing another bench project that I told you about. Is this always possible? Why not? Whatever. All these things. Julian is looking more at complex structure, complex preferences, not just I like, I don't, but any kind of more complex settings. Ule is looking in very general at all of the things that I mentioned before. So making decision, collective decision, worked on a lot of the different things. Ronald, also very broad interest in designing algorithm, efficient algorithm. That's one aspect I've not mentioned, but we're interested in finding efficient algorithm for these things. I won't get into details here. Adrienne, who's looking at this more epistemic approach, so like this wisdom of the crowd kind of things, Is it always the case that a crowd can be wise or not? And finally, Jan, who's looking more at these settings where you do elect several candidates. So like a parliament, for instance, participatory budgeting is also an instance of that. Yeah, that's our little group. We work next door. If you want to come on, you do have to cross the road, but apart from that, it's quite easy to come. That's it for what I had for you today. Thanks for attending, and I'm very happy to take any questions you may have. And yeah, thanks. Anything?
Download the slides from the internet.
Can you download the slides from the internet? Yes. If you go on my website, I'll put them there. And my website is simonray, so as written down here, but stuck without the space, .fr. But you can also find me through the university and all of this. Any? Yes?
Yes, so Simon, thanks, this was fun. So, take the Brexit vote, for example. Would you say that the vote Remain made a mistake by letting it be a yes-no decision rather than a yes, we stay, or we leave, but we go into this, no, we leave, we go into it. So, vote no was sort of like a huge opportunity. So you aggregate a lot of people who had different opinions about how Brexit should be, and they all voted on no, rather than voting on a particular plan after leaving the EU.
I mean, that's a very good question. I don't have much insight. Was it really possible at that time to present all the options? I'm not sure, right? Because it was also very unclear in there. When they designed the process, it was very unclear. I would tend to think that maybe they rushed the process a bit too much, and they could have taken more time to kind of try to design the process fair. They had different kind of political agenda that was kind of clashing with this taking time, but
in general, like a referendum, you would say it's most of the political questions already happen in formulating the question.
yes,
Yeah.
indeed. So, okay, one thing is that there's always a balance to find. So let's put about any kind of political motivation behind that, because that also happens a lot, but let's not talk about that. If you just look at the best way of designing an election, there's always a balance between wanting more information, because it's just better. The more information you have, the best your choice will be somehow. And having the citizens to vote, and to vote understanding the way it works. And I'll give you an example. We are very good in the field of social choice to come up with very complicated rules, which are hard to understand, and even for me sometimes they are. So it's just impossible to imagine that you would do such a thing in an election where you have to have everyone understanding it. And the way you submit your preferences is also like that. I don't remember who proposed to rank the project for participatory budgeting, but that's also an example. Ranking the project gives you more information than just saying yes or no, or different. It's not really comparable. But it's also very hard. Like, if you ask me, do I prefer more the plant here or the bench here? Well, I mean, it's very hard to know exactly these things, right? So you do have to find a balance between the expressiveness, so the amount of information you get from the vote, and the difficulty for the voters to actually do the voting. Anything else from someone?
You also use behavioral aspects.
So I don't, but it has been used a lot, especially from the literature coming from economics. There have been a lot of studies on the way people vote, like experimental study on the way they vote, and then developing a behavioral theory of the way they vote. I can't really tell you much on that. That's a bit too far from my field, but yeah. Okay, so for PB, so for participatory budgeting, so some people looked at how difficult it was for voters to use different types of ballots. So the ranking, the just saying yes or no, the giving numbers. Sometimes we ask you, okay, give me a score from 0 to 10. How do you like each of them? And unsurprisingly, the result follows what you would expect. Like the ranking is harder than just saying yes or no. The numbers is a bit weird, exactly because, well, is it a 7 or an 8?
What about the analytic hierarchy process?
What do you mean by it?
It's a decision rule developed by Thomas Sater.
I don't know it. How do you call it?
Huh?
How do you call it?
AHP.
AHE.
Analytic
Analytical.
hierarchy process.
Okay. I never heard of it, but yeah, be happy to hear it.
Which rule are they going to use in South January?
I don't want to talk about that.
Oh.
No, they changed the process actually. I was looking at it while I was preparing this talk. So last year they used ranking and then selecting. And this year they will ask, the type of ballot is different. I forgot exactly how they were going to do that, but they will not ask yes or no ballots. Maybe it's, no, okay, they will ask yes or no ballots, but what you, okay, no. What they will ask is the outcome itself. So like you don't vote on a project, but you say, if I had to decide, I would have selected all these projects. And then from that, it's very unclear because it's not written down in the website what kind of way of counting, but maybe just selecting the one with the highest thing.
And they know you analytical.
They know me. We tried to work with them. Wasn't so successful in the end. It's a bit hard. Like they are interested in the idea, but also the implementation itself takes a lot of time. They are all very busy with other projects. So yeah, indeed. Okay, I guess if there's no further question, I will stop here and there you go. Thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of the day.